The day was gloomy, the kind where the sky seems to hang low, pressing down on everything below. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh flowers, a mix that felt heavy, yet strangely comforting. Everyone in the small town had shown up at the churchyard for the funeral of a man everyone knew, Mr. Thompson. He wasn't just any man. He was the guy who always had a smile, a wave, or a kind word for anyone who crossed his path. His sudden death, ruled an accident, had left the community in shock. At the center of it all stood his wife, her face pale and streaked with tears. She clutched a tissue tightly in one hand, while the other rested on the shoulder of her young son, Ethan. Ethan, barely 10 years old, stood quietly beside her, his eyes fixed on the casket ahead. He held a stuffed bear close to his chest, its fur worn from years of love and use. Unlike the others around him, Ethan hadn't cried much since the news broke. He just seemed distant, as if part of him wasn't fully present. People lined up to offer their condolences, each one adding their voice to the chorus of sorrow. "He was such a good man," they said, "if there's anything we can do." But Ethan didn't hear them. His mind was somewhere else, replaying fragments of conversations, moments, and strange feelings that had been nagging at him ever since his father's supposed death. As the priest spoke softly about life, loss, and moving forward, Ethan's grip on the bear tightened. Something inside him was screaming, louder than the quiet murmurs of the crowd. When the service ended and people began filing past the casket to pay their final respects, Ethan suddenly stepped forward. It wasn't planned, it just happened. All eyes turned to him as his small frame stood out against the sea of adults. "My dad isn't dead," he blurted out, his voice trembling but clear enough to silence the entire gathering. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then came the whispers, hushed and uncertain. Was this just a child's denial? A desperate attempt to hold on to hope? Or was there something more to what Ethan was saying? Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. But he didn't back down. Instead, he took a deep breath and added, "I saw him last night." The words hung in the air like storm clouds, thick and ominous. His mother froze mid-motion, her hands gripping the edge of her purse. A family friend knelt beside Ethan, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure, buddy?" the man asked, his tone soft but probing. Ethan nodded vigorously. "Yes, I'm sure. He came into my room. He told me not to tell anyone he was there, but—" His voice trailed off as he looked around at the faces staring back at him. Some looked concerned, others skeptical. But one thing was certain. Ethan's words had stirred something deep within the crowd. Someone pulled out their phone and dialed the local police station. They weren't accusing anyone. They just thought it was important to report what the boy had said. Within minutes, Officer Daniels arrived. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd been on the force for over 20 years, and he could sense when something wasn't quite right. Kneeling down to Ethan's level, Officer Daniels spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Can you tell me exactly what happened, son?" Ethan hesitated for a second before nodding again. "It was late at night," he began, his voice steadier now. "I woke up because I heard footsteps. At first I thought it was Mom, but then I saw him. It was Dad. He looked scared, but he smiled at me. He said he couldn't stay long, but he wanted me to know he was okay." Officer Daniels exchanged a glance with another officer standing nearby. There was something about Ethan's story that tugged at his instincts. It wasn't just the sincerity in the boy's voice. It was the details, the way he described his father's expression, the urgency in his tone. Whatever doubts lingered in the air, the officers decided it was worth investigating further. With permission from Mrs. Thompson, they headed to the family home. As they stepped inside, the house felt eerily quiet, almost too still. Everything appeared normal at first glance. The furniture neatly arranged, pictures lining the walls, reminders of happier times. But as they moved through the rooms, something caught Officer Daniels' eye. On the wooden floor near the staircase, faint, muddy footprints led upstairs. Following the trail, They reached the attic door. It was locked, which struck them as odd. After a few attempts, they managed to force it open. What they found inside stopped them in their tracks. Hidden behind stacks of boxes was a small makeshift room, cramped and dimly lit. Papers were scattered everywhere. Maps marked with red circles, documents filled with unfamiliar names and numbers, and a laptop that radiated warmth, indicating it had been used recently. And then there was the note. Written in hurried handwriting, it lay on the floor near the desk. Picking it up, Officer Daniels read the words aloud. "Stay brave, buddy. Daddy loves you." The discovery in the attic left everyone stunned. Officer Daniels stood frozen for a moment, the note clutched in his hand as he tried to make sense of what they had stumbled upon. The room was like a time capsule of secrets, maps with strange markings, documents filled with cryptic notes, and that warm laptop humming softly on the desk. It didn't take long for him to realize this wasn't just about a grieving boy refusing to accept his father's death. Something much bigger was at play. Back downstairs, Mrs. Thompson sat in the living room, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. She looked up when the officers returned, their faces serious. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Daniels hesitated before answering. He didn't want to alarm her further, but she deserved to know the truth, or at least part of it. "There's a hidden room upstairs," he began carefully. "It looks like your husband was using it to store some sensitive information." Her eyes widened, and she set the teacup down with a shaky hand. "Sensitive? What do you mean?" As the officers explained what they'd uncovered, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place for Mrs. Thompson. She remembered how her husband had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his supposed accident, late-night phone calls, sudden disappearances, and an unshakable tension that lingered in the air whenever he thought no one was watching. At the time, she'd chalked it up to stress from work. Now she wasn't so sure. Word spread quickly through the town. By evening, neighbors who had attended the funeral earlier that day were buzzing with rumors. Some whispered about secret debts or illicit activities. Others speculated about darker possibilities. No one could agree on what might have driven Mr. Thompson to fake his own death, but one thing was clear. The quiet life everyone thought the Thompsons led was anything but. Ethan, meanwhile, remained resolute. While adults around him debated theories and questioned motives, he stayed focused on what mattered most to him, his father's promise. Dad said he'd come back. He told anyone who would listen. He wouldn't lie about that. His unwavering belief stood in stark contrast to the growing uncertainty among the adults. For Ethan, there was no doubt. His dad was alive, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Officer Daniels returned to the station with the evidence collected from the attic. He spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together fragments of a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true. The maps pointed to locations across the region, warehouses, abandoned buildings, even stretches of wooded areas. The names on the papers belonged to people no one in town recognized, yet they appeared repeatedly, often accompanied by dates and times. Most chilling of all were the handwritten notes scattered throughout, detailing plans and warnings. One phrase kept appearing. "They're watching." Daniels knew they were dealing with something dangerous. Whoever these they weren't ordinary criminals. This was organized, calculated, and ruthless. And if Mr. Thompson had gone to such lengths to protect his family, it meant they were still a threat. As the investigation deepened, Daniels reached out to federal authorities for assistance. Within days, agents arrived in town, setting up a temporary command center in an unmarked van parked discreetly near the Thompson home. They worked tirelessly, analyzing data, tracking leads, and identifying key players in what appeared to be a sprawling criminal network operating right under the town's nose. For Mrs. Thompson, the days blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Reporters camped outside her house, shoving microphones in her face every time she stepped outside. Neighbors stopped by, offering sympathy but also probing for details. Even friends she'd known for years seemed to look at her differently now, their eyes filled with questions she couldn't answer. Through it all, Ethan remained her anchor. His steadfast faith in his father gave her strength, even as the weight of the situation threatened to crush her. One night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, she heard a faint noise coming from downstairs. Her heart raced as she grabbed a kitchen knife and crept toward the sound. Every creak of the floorboards felt deafening in the silence. When she reached the living room, she froze. There, standing in the shadows, was her husband. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, and his eyes wild with panic. Before she could react, he collapsed into her arms, clutching her tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely. "I never wanted any of this. But they're on to me. You need to leave. All of you." Mrs. Thompson's mind reeled. Leave? Where would they go? How could they escape something she barely understood? But before she could respond, he pulled away, pressing something into her hand. A flash drive. "Everything's on here," he said urgently. "Give it to Daniels. Trust no one else." And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as he'd come. Mrs. Thompson stood frozen in the middle of her living room, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The silence around her felt suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of crickets outside. She glanced toward the door where her husband had vanished moments ago, half expecting him to reappear and tell her it was all some cruel joke. But he didn't come back. He was gone. Again. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing. What had just happened? Why had he risked coming home if he knew they were watching him? And what exactly was on this tiny piece of metal that seemed to carry so much weight? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. "Mom?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his stuffed bear dangling from one hand. His eyes were wide with curiosity and concern. "Did you hear something?" For a split second she considered lying, to protect him, to shield him from whatever storm was brewing. But then she remembered how fiercely he believed in his father. Ethan deserved the truth, as much as she could give him. Taking a deep breath, she patted the seat beside her. "Come here, sweetheart," she said softly. When Ethan sat down, she wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Your dad? He was here tonight," she began, choosing her words carefully. Ethan's face lit up instantly. "I told you," he exclaimed, sitting up straighter. "He promised he'd come back." "I know, honey," she said, forcing a small smile. "But we need to be careful now. Dad gave me something important, a little device with information on it. He said it's very valuable, but also dangerous. That's why he left again." Ethan frowned, his excitement fading into worry. "Dangerous? Is someone after him?" She hesitated before nodding slowly. "Yes, I think so. And if they find out, we have this..." She held up the flash drive for emphasis. "We might not be safe either." The boy's brow furrowed as he tried to process what she was saying. For the first time since his father disappeared, doubt flickered in his eyes. "Are they bad people?" he asked quietly. "They're very bad people," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But don't worry, we'll figure this out. Your dad trusted Officer Daniels, and so will we." Early the next morning, Mrs. Thompson made her way to the police station. She hadn't slept a wink, her mind replaying every word her husband had said and every detail of his battered appearance. When she arrived, Officer Daniels greeted her with a mixture of concern and determination. He ushered her into a private room, closing the door firmly behind them. Without wasting time, she handed over the flash drive. "My husband came last night," she explained. "He said these people are onto him and warned us to leave town. But before he left, he gave me this. He said everything is on it." Daniels studied the flash drive, his expression grim. "Do you trust him?" he asked bluntly. "Do you believe he's telling the truth?" She nodded without hesitation. "Yes. Whatever he's involved in, it's scaring him. I've never seen him like that before. He looked hunted." The officer leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "If this turns out to be what I think it is, we're dealing with something far bigger than local law enforcement can handle. I've already contacted federal agents. They'll need to analyze this immediately." As they spoke, Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every minute that passed felt like another step closer to danger. She thought about Ethan waiting at home, blissfully unaware of how precarious their situation really was. How long could they keep him safe? By midday, the flash drive had been delivered to the federal team stationed nearby. Within hours, the agents uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence, photos, recordings, and detailed logs exposing a criminal syndicate operating across multiple states. The group was involved in everything from illegal trafficking to extortion, preying on small businesses and vulnerable individuals. Worse still, several prominent figures in the town were implicated, including a few who had attended the funeral just days earlier. As the investigation expanded, so did the tension in the community. Whispers turned into outright accusations, and fear spread like wildfire. People began locking their doors at night, avoiding eye contact on the streets, and questioning who among them might be connected to the syndicate. The once close-knit town fractured under the weight of suspicion. Meanwhile, Ethan remained oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. To him, the world still revolved around one simple fact: his dad was alive. Each day, he scanned the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man he loved more than anything. His mother did her best to keep him distracted, enrolling him in art classes and taking him on long walks through the woods. But even she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that followed her everywhere. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table coloring pictures, Ethan looked up suddenly. "Do you think Dad misses us?" he asked, his voice tinged with sadness. Her heart ached at the question. "Of course he does," she replied, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "But right now he's doing everything he can to protect us. That's what good dads do. They make sacrifices for their families." Ethan nodded solemnly, returning to his drawing. In his picture, a stick-figure family stood happily together under a bright yellow sun. His father was front and center, smiling wide. Unbeknownst to them, the syndicate was closing in. Despite Mr. Thompson's efforts to stay hidden, his movements hadn't gone unnoticed. One of their informants spotted him leaving the house that fateful night and reported back immediately. Now, armed with new intel, the criminals prepared for their next move. Back at the command center, Officer Daniels received a tip-off from a confidential source warning of an impending attack. Panic surged through him as he realized the Thompsons were sitting ducks. Grabbing his radio, he barked orders to his team. "Get over there now, secure the house." It was a race against time, and the stakes had never been higher. The warning came just after sunset, when the sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple. Officer Daniels had been reviewing case files at the makeshift command center when his phone buzzed urgently. It was a message from an anonymous tipster, a person who claimed to have ties to the syndicate but wanted out. The message was short and chilling. "They know where he went. They're moving tonight." Daniels didn't waste a second. His gut told him this wasn't a bluff. He grabbed his jacket and radioed his team, barking orders with a sense of urgency that left no room for questions. "We've got a credible threat against the Thompson household. Get there now, quietly, but fast. We can't let them get inside." As the patrol cars sped toward the house, Daniels followed close behind, his mind racing. He replayed every detail of the investigation so far: the hidden room, the flash drive, the boy's unwavering belief in his father. None of it made complete sense yet, but one thing was clear. The Thompson family was at the center of a storm they couldn't possibly have prepared for. At the same time, Mrs. Thompson was tucking Ethan into bed. She kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door slightly ajar as she always did. Downstairs, she sat on the couch, staring blankly at the muted television. Her thoughts were miles away, tangled up in worries about her husband and fears for her son's safety. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sent a jolt of panic through her. Suddenly, headlights swept across the living room curtains. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Cars pulling into driveways weren't unusual in their quiet neighborhood, but something about the timing felt wrong. Then came the sound of tires crunching gravel. Not one car, but several. Her instincts screamed at her to move. She rushed to the window, peeking cautiously through the edge of the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. 2 black SUVs were parked haphazardly near the curb, their engines idling ominously. Men dressed in dark clothes stepped out, their movements deliberate and coordinated. One of them carried what looked like a crowbar, while another held a flashlight that cut through the evening shadows. Mrs. Thompson's hands trembled as she backed away from the window. They were here. Somehow they'd found them. Panic surged through her body, but she forced herself to think. Ethan was upstairs, asleep, or at least she hoped he was. She needed to protect him, no matter what. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering frantically into the receiver. "There are men outside my house. I think they're trying to break in. Please hurry." The dispatcher assured her help was on the way, but she knew it wouldn't arrive in time. She had to act now. Moving quickly, she locked the front and back doors, then grabbed a kitchen knife and hid in the hallway leading to the stairs. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she listened for any sign of movement outside. The seconds stretched into eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying her terror. Upstairs, Ethan stirred in his sleep. A faint noise, a muffled thud, pulled him from his dreams. At first, he thought it was part of his imagination, but then he heard it again. The unmistakable sound of glass breaking downstairs. His eyes snapped open wide with fear. For a moment, he lay perfectly still, unsure if he should call out or stay quiet. Then he remembered his mother's words earlier that, "If anything happens, stay in your room and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Clutching his stuffed bear tightly, he slipped out of bed and crawled under it, curling into a ball. His heart pounded in his chest as he strained to listen for voices or footsteps. Outside, the wind howled eerily, masking the sounds of intruders, creeping closer. Downstairs, the front door groaned as someone tried to force it open. Mrs. Thompson tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles white. She could hear low voices now, speaking in hushed tones. They sounded angry, determined. One voice stood out above the rest, a man barking orders. "Check the windows, make sure nobody gets out." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't burglars looking for valuables. These men were here for her and maybe even for Ethan. Her stomach churned as she realized the truth. This wasn't random. It was personal. They must have figured out her husband had passed along the flash drive, and now they wanted revenge. Just as she braced herself to confront whoever came through the door, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Relief washed over her for a brief moment. Help was coming. But the relief was short-lived. The men outside reacted instantly, abandoning their attempt to break in and retreating to their vehicles. Tires screeched as they sped away, disappearing into the night. Moments later, police cars surrounded the house, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Officers poured out, guns drawn, securing the perimeter before entering. Cautiously, when Officer Daniels finally stepped inside, he found Mrs. Thompson standing in the hallway, pale and shaking but alive. "They were here," she stammered, clutching the knife like a lifeline. "They almost got in." Daniels placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. We'll make sure nothing happens to you or your son." But as he escorted her upstairs to check on Ethan, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The syndicate had made its move, and though they'd failed tonight, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Whatever secrets were buried in that flash drive, they were worth killing for and protecting. When they reached Ethan's room, the boy was still hiding under his bed, trembling but unharmed. As his mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face, Daniels promised himself one thing. No matter what it took, he would keep this family safe. Because in all his years on the force, he'd never seen a child fight so hard to believe in his father or a mother risk everything to shield her son. The night stretched on, heavy with tension. After the police secured the house and ensured no immediate threat remained, Officer Daniels insisted the Thompsons leave their home. For good. "It's not safe here anymore," he told them firmly, his voice low but urgent. "These people will be back, and next time they might not fail." Mrs. Thompson nodded numbly, her arms wrapped protectively around Ethan, who clung to her like a lifeline. The boy hadn't said much since being coaxed out from under his bed, but his wide eyes spoke volumes. He'd seen fear in his mother's face, heard the urgency in the officer's tone, and now understood that danger wasn't just some abstract idea. It was real, and it had come knocking at their door. With little time to pack, they grabbed only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, a few cherished belongings. Ethan insisted on bringing his stuffed bear, clutching it tightly as if it were a shield against the chaos unfolding around him. As they stepped outside, neighbors peeked through curtains, their faces etched with curiosity and unease. Word of the attempted break-in spread quickly, fueling the growing sense of paranoia in the town. The officers escorted the family to a safe house, a small apartment tucked away in an unassuming building on the outskirts of the city. It was sparsely furnished but functional, offering a temporary refuge. Still, Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Even though they were miles away from their home, she knew they weren't truly safe. Not until whoever was after them was caught. Over the next few days, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Officers kept watch outside the safe house 24/7, ensuring no one could approach unnoticed. Inside, Mrs. Thompson tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Ethan's sake. She cooked meals, read bedtime stories, and encouraged him to draw pictures or play games. But beneath her calm exterior, she was unraveling. Every knock on the door sent her heart racing. Every phone call made her jump. Sleep eluded her entirely, her mind replaying the events of that terrifying night over and over again. Ethan, too, struggled to adjust. The boy who once ran freely through the streets of their quiet town now flinched at sudden noises and refused to leave his mother's side. Yet, despite everything, his faith in his father remained unshaken. One afternoon, as he sat coloring, at the kitchen table, he looked up at her and asked, "Do you think Dad knows we're okay?" She forced a smile, kneeling beside him. "I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Your dad is smart and brave. He'll find a way to keep us all together." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. Where was he? Was he safe? And why hadn't he reached out again? Each unanswered question added another layer of uncertainty to their already precarious situation. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. The contents of the flash drive revealed more than anyone had anticipated. It contained detailed records of illegal transactions, black market deals, and even names of high-ranking officials tied to the syndicate. Most alarming was a list of planned operations, one of which involved targeting local families suspected of aiding law enforcement. The Thompsons' address was circled in red ink. Daniels realized they were dealing with a highly organized network capable of striking anywhere, anytime. Their leader, identified only by the alias The Broker, was a shadowy figure whose influence extended far beyond the town. Whoever this person was, they didn't tolerate betrayal, and Mr. Thompson's actions clearly qualified as such. Federal agents joined forces with the local police, combing through every shred of evidence. Surveillance footage, financial records, and witness testimonies were analyzed meticulously. Slowly but surely, a clearer picture began to emerge. Several key members of the syndicate were identified, including a man known for orchestrating violent attacks on those who crossed the group. His name was flagged repeatedly in connection with recent threats against the Thompsons. Armed with this information, Daniels devised a plan. They needed to strike first, to dismantle the syndicate before it could retaliate. But doing so required precision and speed. Any misstep could put countless lives at risk, including those of the Thompson family. Back at the safe house, Mrs. Thompson received a call from Daniels late one evening. His voice was steady but carried an undertone of gravity. "We've located your husband," he said without preamble. Her breath caught in her throat. Is he alive?" she managed to ask. "Yes, he's alive," Daniels confirmed. "But he's in hiding, and he's been moving constantly to avoid detection. We believe he's trying to gather enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. That's why he hasn't contacted you directly. It would put you in even greater danger." Tears welled up in her eyes as relief washed over her. At least, she knew he was fighting, not just for himself but for them. Still, the weight of separation pressed heavily on her chest. "What happens now?" she whispered. "We're closing in," Daniels replied. "We've identified several key players and are preparing to take them down. Once we neutralize the leadership, the rest of the syndicate will crumble. Until then, I need you and Ethan to stay hidden and trust us to do our job." She thanked him, her voice trembling, and hung up the phone. Turning to Ethan, who was watching TV in the living room, she hesitated. Should she tell him about his father? Or would it only raise false hope if something went wrong? In the end, she decided, honesty was the best course. Sitting beside him, she took a deep breath and said, "Your dad is okay. He's working hard to make sure we can all be together again soon." Ethan's face lit up instantly. "See? I told you he's alive," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her neck. For the first time in days, a genuine smile broke through her exhaustion. As dawn broke the following morning, federal agents launched a coordinated raid on multiple locations linked to the syndicate. Armed with warrants and backup teams, they stormed warehouses, offices, and private residences, arresting suspects and seizing incriminating documents. The operation was swift and efficient, catching many off guard. At the center of it all was a sprawling compound nestled deep in the woods. Intelligence suggested this was the syndicate's headquarters, the nerve center where decisions were made and orders issued. As agents approached cautiously, they spotted a lone figure slipping out through a side entrance. It was a man wearing a hood, his face obscured. He moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "Stop right there!" an agent shouted, raising his weapon. The man froze, slowly raising his hands above his head. When the hood was pulled back, everyone present recognized him immediately. It was the broker, or rather, someone who had been masquerading as one. His arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, leaving the remaining members scrambling to regroup. But Daniels knew they weren't done yet. While the arrests marked a significant victory, the true mastermind behind the syndicate remained at large. Somewhere out there, someone was still pulling strings, and until they were caught, the Thompsons' nightmare wouldn't truly end. The arrest of the man posing as the broker was a major breakthrough, but it didn't bring the sense of closure everyone had hoped for. Instead, it raised more questions than answers. Who was really behind the syndicate? Was this man just a pawn, carrying out orders from someone higher up? And most importantly, how long would it take to find the true leader before they struck again? Officer Daniels stood in the dimly lit briefing room, staring at the whiteboard covered in names, connections, and red strings linking suspects to crimes. His eyes lingered on one name written in bold letters: the broker. Beside it was a question mark, a reminder that the identity of the real mastermind remained unknown. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. This case was unlike anything he'd ever worked on, layers upon layers of deception, betrayal, and danger. As the hours ticked by, federal agents combed through evidence seized during the raids. Computers were analyzed, phones decrypted, and documents scrutinized. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. Hidden within encrypted messages and coded notes was a trail leading to offshore accounts, shell companies, and international contacts. It became clear that the syndicate wasn't just a local operation. It spanned continents with roots buried deep in corruption and greed. But amidst all the chaos, one piece of information caught Daniels' attention: a single handwritten note found in the compound. It read, "Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Eliminate loose ends." Loose ends. The phrase sent chills down his spine. Who were these loose ends? Were the Thompsons still targets, or was there someone else involved? Daniels immediately called the safe house to check on Mrs. Thompson and Ethan. When she answered, her voice sounded weary but steady. "We're okay," she assured him. "No one's been here except your officers." "Good," he replied. "But we need to move you again, just to be safe." Her breath hitched. "What do you mean? Is something wrong?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But I don't want to take any chances, trust me. I'll explain everything once you're relocated. Reluctantly, she agreed. Within hours, the family was moved to a new location, a secluded cabin surrounded by dense woods far from prying eyes. Officers stationed nearby kept constant watch, ensuring no one could approach unnoticed. Though the change provided a fresh layer of security, it also heightened their isolation. For Mrs. Thompson, the days grew longer and lonelier, each moment spent wondering when or if they'd ever return to a normal life. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued his desperate fight to dismantle the syndicate from the shadows. Hiding in abandoned buildings and relying on trusted allies, he gathered intel bit by bit, risking his life with every step. Each night, he listened to police scanners piecing together updates about the investigation. Hearing reports of arrests gave him hope, but he knew the battle wasn't over, not while the broker remained free. One evening, as he huddled in an old warehouse, his phone buzzed softly. A message appeared on the screen. They know about the boy. His blood ran cold. They were targeting Ethan now, his innocent child who had done nothing wrong. Anger surged through him, mingling with guilt. This was his fault. He had dragged his family into this nightmare, and now they were paying the price. Determined to protect them, he made a risky decision. Using a burner phone, he called Daniels directly. The officer picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" Daniels demanded. "I can't say," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice low and urgent. "But listen carefully, they've shifted focus. My son is their next target. You need to get him somewhere safe, far away from here." Daniels gripped the phone tightly. "We've already moved them. They're secure for now." "For now isn't enough." "Mr. Thompson snapped, his frustration boiling over. "These people don't stop until they win. Please, promise me you'll keep him safe." There was a long pause before Daniels responded. "I give you my word. I won't let anything happen to your family." Hearing those words brought some comfort, but Mr. Thompson knew promises weren't enough. Action was needed, and fast. Back at the cabin, Ethan sensed the growing tension. His mother tried to shield him, keeping conversations vague and forcing smiles whenever he asked questions. But he wasn't fooled. He could see the fear in her eyes, feel the weight of whatever secret she was carrying. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch watching the leaves sway in the breeze, he finally spoke up. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with worry. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. How much should she tell him? In the end, honesty seemed like the only option. "We're okay right now, sweetheart," she said, pulling him close. "But there are bad people who want to hurt us because of something Dad did. That's why we have to stay hidden." Ethan nodded solemnly, processing her words. After a moment, he looked up at her. "Will Dad come back for us?" Her heart ached at the question. She wanted to tell him yes, to reassure him that everything would work out. But the truth was, she didn't know. All she could do was hold him tighter and whisper, "He loves us very much, and he's doing everything he can to make sure we're safe." Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. Federal agents closed in on several high-profile figures tied to the syndicate, dismantling key operations and cutting off funding streams. Yet, the elusive mastermind remained elusive, always one step ahead. Frustration simmered among the team, but Daniels refused to give up. He poured every ounce of energy into finding answers, driven by the faces of the Thompson family. Then, late one night, a breakthrough came. A tip-off led investigators to a private jet scheduled to depart under suspicious circumstances. Passengers listed on the manifest included individuals flagged as associates of the syndicate. Among them was a name that stopped Daniels in his tracks: Victor Kane, a wealthy businessman with ties to organized crime. Kane had always operated in the shadows, using wealth and influence to evade scrutiny. But recent evidence suggested he was more than just a financier. He was the puppeteer pulling the strings. The discovery reignited the investigation, shifting focus to uncovering proof of his involvement. As dawn broke, Daniels assembled his team. "This is it," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "If we can tie Kane to the syndicate, We can bring the whole thing crashing down. Let's move. The race was on. With time running out, they prepared for what might be their final confrontation. The morning air was crisp and the sun had barely begun to rise as Officer Daniels and his team gathered in a dimly lit conference room. Maps, files, and photos covered the walls, forming a chaotic web of clues that had taken weeks to piece together. Now, with Victor Kane at the center of their investigation, they were closer than ever to unraveling the syndicate's grip on the town and beyond. Daniels stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of his team. Everyone looked exhausted but determined. "We've got one shot at this," he said firmly. "If we don't act now, Kane will slip through our fingers, and if he does, the Thompsons, and anyone else caught in this mess, will never be safe." The plan was risky but straightforward. Intercept Kane before he boarded the private jet scheduled to leave later that day. Agents would storm the hangar where the plane was parked, using every resource at their disposal to catch him off guard. It wasn't just about arresting him, it was about proving his connection to the syndicate once and for all. Evidence had been piling up, encrypted emails, wire transfers, and testimonies from arrested members, but they needed something undeniable, something that could seal the case shut. As preparations intensified, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Every minute mattered. He glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at the photo of Kane pinned to the board. The man's smug expression seemed to mock them, daring them to try and stop him. Daniels clenched his jaw. They wouldn't fail. Meanwhile, miles away, Mr. Thompson sat hunched over a laptop in yet another dingy hideout. His hands trembled slightly as he typed furiously, searching for any trace of his family online. News reports about the raids had flooded social media, but there was no mention of the Thompsons, or Ethan. That worried him more than anything. Were they truly safe, or were they being kept out of sight for a reason? His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. "Kane is moving today. Final chance." He froze, staring at the screen. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. If Kane escaped, the syndicate might regroup under new leadership, stronger and more ruthless than before, but if they stopped him, maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a future without fear. With shaking fingers, he sent a quick reply. "Tell me where." Minutes later, coordinates appeared on his screen along with a single word: hangar. Mr. Thompson didn't hesitate. Grabbing a jacket and stuffing a few essentials into a backpack, he slipped out into the cold morning air. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant walking straight into danger. At the cabin, Mrs. Thompson woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Her heart leapt into her throat as she grabbed Ethan and pulled him close, whispering urgently, "Stay quiet, sweetheart. Don't move." But instead of intruders, two officers entered, their faces grim. One of them stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us, right now." "What's happening?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "We've located Kane," the officer explained quickly. "There's going to be a raid soon and we can't risk staying here. Too many variables. You'll be safer somewhere else until it's over." She nodded numbly, clutching Ethan's hand as they guided her to a waiting vehicle. As they drove away, she stared out the window, her mind racing. Was this the end? Or just another chapter in their nightmare? Back at the hangar, tension crackled, in the air like static electricity. Federal agents surrounded the building, weapons drawn, communicating silently through radios. Inside, Kane paced nervously, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. Something felt off. He'd received word that authorities were closing in, but how much did they really know? He glanced at his watch. The plane was fueled and ready. All he had to do was board it and freedom awaited. Suddenly, shouts erupted outside. Heavy boots pounded the ground as agents stormed the hangar, shouting orders. "Victor Kane, hands where we can see them." For a split second, Kane froze, his face pale. Then, with surprising speed, he bolted toward a side exit. Shots rang out, shattering glass and echoing through the cavernous space. Agents gave chase, tackling him to the ground before he could escape. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Daniel stepped forward, his gaze locked on Kane. "It's over," he said simply. "You're done." Kane sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You think this changes anything? People like me always find a way." Daniels leaned in closer, his voice low and steely. "Not this time." Hours later, news of Kane's arrest spread like wildfire. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, though whispers of disbelief lingered. How could someone so powerful fall so hard? Meanwhile, federal agents worked tirelessly to connect the dots, ensuring Kane's empire crumbled completely. Documents seized during the raid revealed names, transactions, and plans, enough evidence to put dozens behind bars. When Mrs. Thompson heard the news, tears streamed down her face, not just from relief, but from gratitude. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they might survive this ordeal intact. Ethan, sitting beside her, smiled softly. "Dad's coming home now, right?" She hugged him tightly, her voice breaking. "Yes, sweetheart, he's coming home." Unbeknownst to them, Mr. Thompson watched the live broadcast of Kane's arrest from a nearby diner, his face hidden beneath a hood. Relief washed over him as he realized the fight was finally over, or at least as over as it could be. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Daniel's number. "It's me," he said quietly when the officer answered. "I'm ready to come in." Daniels exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and relief in his tone. "Where are you?" "I'll meet you at the station," Mr. Thompson replied. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Let me see my family first." The police station buzzed with activity as Officer Daniels hung up the phone. He glanced at his watch, then turned to one of his colleagues. "He's coming in," he said firmly. "Make sure everything's ready." For months, the investigation had consumed every waking moment of his life. Now, with Victor Kane behind bars and the syndicate dismantled, it felt like the storm was finally beginning to clear. But there was still one piece left unresolved, the man who had started it all, Mr. Thompson. Daniels understood why the man had done what he did. Protecting your family was a primal instinct, something everyone could relate to. Still, rules were rules. Faking your own death wasn't exactly legal, no matter how noble the intentions. Yet given everything the Thompsons had endured, Daniels couldn't bring himself to treat this like an ordinary case. This family deserved closure, and maybe even a second chance. At the safe house, Mrs. Thompson paced nervously, her hands clasped tightly together. Ethan sat on the couch, swinging his legs back and forth as he stared at the floor. Neither of them had spoken much since the call earlier that morning. Officer Daniels had promised they'd see Mr. Thompson soon, but soon felt agonizingly slow. Finally, the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the silence. Ethan shot to his feet, running to the window just in time to see a car pulling up outside. His breath caught in his throat. Standing beside Daniels was a man wearing a hoodie, his face partially obscured, but Ethan didn't need to see clearly to recognize him. "Dad!" he shouted, throwing open the door and rushing outside. The man lowered his hood, revealing tired eyes and a weary smile. For a moment, father and son simply stood there, staring at each other as if unsure whether this was real or another dream. Then with a sob, Ethan launched himself into his arms. Mr. Thompson hugged him fiercely, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered hoarsely. "I never wanted to leave you." Behind them, Mrs. Thompson stepped onto the porch, her hand pressed to her mouth. She looked at her husband, taking in the bruises, the weight loss, the exhaustion etched into his features. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly she walked toward him, wrapping her arms around both him and their son. They stood there together, a broken family clinging to each other as if afraid to let go. Officer Daniels watched from a distance, giving them space. He knew this reunion wouldn't fix everything overnight. Too much had happened. Too many scars had formed. But it was a start, a fragile, beautiful beginning. Later that evening, after the initial flood of emotions had subsided, the family gathered around the kitchen table. A pot of tea steamed in the center, its warmth filling the room. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his voice heavy with guilt. "I owe you both an explanation," he began. "And I don't expect forgiveness, not yet. But I want you to know why I did what I did." He told them everything. How he'd stumbled upon evidence of the syndicate while working late nights at his office, how they'd threatened him when he refused to cooperate, and how faking his death had seemed like the only way to protect them. "Every day I stayed away, I hated myself for it," he admitted, "but knowing you were safe made it bearable." Mrs. Thompson listened silently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You should have trusted us," she said softly. "We're a team, remember? No matter what happens, we face it together." Ethan nodded enthusiastically, clutching his stuffed bear tightly. "Yeah, Dad, we're stronger when we're together." A small laugh escaped Mr. Thompson's lips, followed by more tears. "You're right," he said, squeezing her hand. "From now on, we stick together, no matter what." The days that followed were far from easy. Adjusting to life after such trauma took time, patience, and countless conversations. Therapists helped the family process their emotions, and community members rallied around them, offering support in ways big and small. Slowly but surely, the Thompsons began rebuilding their lives. As for Mr. Thompson, he cooperated fully with authorities, providing detailed accounts of the syndicate's operations and helping identify key players. In return, prosecutors agreed to consider leniency in his sentencing, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances surrounding his actions. One sunny afternoon, weeks after Kane's arrest, the town gathered for a special ceremony honoring those who had fought against the syndicate. Officers, federal agents, and even ordinary citizens stood side by side, celebrating justice served and resilience triumphing over fear. Among the crowd were the Thompsons, holding hands as they listened to speeches praising courage and unity. When it was over, Ethan tugged on his father's sleeve. "Can we go home now?" he asked, yawning sleepily. Mr. Thompson smiled, ruffling his hair. "Sure thing, buddy. Let's go home." As they walked away, hand in hand, it was impossible not to notice the change in them. They weren't the same people who had stood at that churchyard months ago, grieving a loss that wasn't real. Pain still lingered, yes, but so did hope. Together they had faced the darkest chapter of their lives and emerged stronger, bound by love and determination. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, they faced it with unwavering faith in one simple truth. No matter what came next, they would face it together.